So now that we've generated our application, let's go ahead and take a look around in a little more detail about what IronSpeed can do for us and the systems that we're trying to develop. As you can see, IronSpeed Designer doesn't hide or encapsulate any code away from us. What it does is it builds these applications, generating the code for us as we would expect in Visual Studio.net. We have ASPX pages, and we have their code behind pages, the .cs pages. Now, for me, since I'm using C#, it's a .cs. If you're used to using VB, it'll be a .bb page that you see there. For the purposes of demonstration, the language doesn't matter so much. And in the IronSpeed Designer interface, what you're going to see is just a whole lot of information that's available to you. I think one of the things that IronSpeed has done and continues to improve upon is making information available in every part of the application. You can view code documentation, examples, and tutorials for each piece of the designer that you're trying to use. Let's go ahead and move back into the ASPX page. And this is where really probably all of us would like to spend the most of our time working, since it is a what you see is what you get interface, and it allows us a lot of choices in terms of customization. And as you get more familiar using IronSpeed Designer, you're going to truly understand how flexible this part of the application is and what we can do. First, I'd like to call some attention to the various tabs within the designer. This is our design view, and it works very similarly to the Visual Studio Designer that you might be used to. Here we have access to our tabs for configuring the actual control, viewing documentation of the control, and viewing code as it relates to the control. The preview tab is a bit of the same thing, but it takes away the design elements and lets you see more what your application is going to look like as you build and run it. The HTML page is a bit misleading in the sense of, yes, it is an HTML page, but for those new to IronSpeed, this is also the page that you would use in the same way that you would use this ASPX page back here. Now, one of the things that you're going to see with this ASPX page is that it is locked down. The ASPX page simply allows us to see how changes we've made in the HTML get copied over into the ASPX page, so that we can see how our application is coming together, and maybe if there's a problem we're looking for, we might be able to come in here and actually see an arrangement in the HTML or maybe a control property, and it'll help us in debugging or resolving a problem within our application. Really important to understand that you do not have the ability to edit anything in this ASPX view. And don't be misled into thinking that you can go behind the application and open the ASPX page with Notepad or another text editor. Bad idea. It's going to bite you. Any changes that you make are going to be overwritten, and justly so, by the IronSpeed Designer. If you need to make application changes in the ASPX page, this is the place to do it, in the HTML tab. Just get used to doing it. It's not that hard, and the longer you use IronSpeed, the more comfortable you will get making those changes. Let's go back to the design view, and let's talk a little bit about this portion of the IronSpeed Designer application. Here we are presented with some different intrinsic controls that are a part of IronSpeed Designer. We have a menu control which is present on every page. We can access elements of this menu control, and we can change properties over here in the Application Explorer. I will go into that in more detail in a later video. We also have what we call record controls, and we have table controls, and understanding the differences between the two will become more apparent just as you get familiar using the application. I'm not going to spend too much time discussing that now. But we will go into the power and flexibility that IronSpeed gives us in tailoring the behavior of these controls. Let's go ahead and look at our designer toolbox, and I'm just going to pin this open now for the sake of this discussion. Here you'll see that we have the access to a bunch of different table panels, and I'm going to focus on this first, as this is where the power our application really comes from is in these table controls. We have edit table controls, which you can go in and edit every record, every row of the data, and we also have show table controls, which are read-only views of our data. Then we can make an individual row selection and go into the edit screen. And we'll cover this in more detail. Up at the very top we have active reports, and I will cover using active reports within an IronSpeed Designer application, but as we go through this toolbox, what I'm doing is just going over each control for the sake of discussion. I may not mention them all, but I might mention maybe high points that might be important. In the actual controls tab, this is probably where I'm going to spend the most time talking. It's important to look at how these controls are arranged. Within IronSpeed, you might see up to 3 different types of controls. We have a button, we have a data-bound button, and then we have an HTML button. Each button will exhibit different behavior. Certain buttons can be bound, certain controls, can be bound to data. Certain controls will be used just the same way an HTML button would be used in classic standardized HTML. And it's important to understand the differences of each control, and I would suggest just playing around with them. Drag each one into an application and see what you can do with them. Do I recommend one over the other? No, I don't. It really just depends on what it is that you need to accomplish within your application. The ASPX controls expose all of the properties that you're used to in Visual Studio.net, although you might access them a little bit differently through IronSpeed Designer than you would through Visual Studio, but all of the properties you're used to working with are there. We have images, image buttons, labels, basically every control that you can really think of. And if there is a control that isn't listed here in this quick user interface, you can always add them by hand, and I will show you ways to do that from within Visual Studio. We have a Crystal Reports tab that corresponds with the active reports. Here we have our header and footer controls, and what this pertains to. Here's our header control, and here's our footer control, and this just gives us access to drag these into custom pages that we might add to our application later. With each release of IronSpeed Designer, IronSpeed gets better and better at integrating third-party control suites into the application. Most of this integration comes from IronSpeed Designer MVPs or even IronSpeed Designer users who contribute the integration of these controls into the IronSpeed Designer interface. If this is something you'd like to do, feel free to contact IronSpeed and express your interest, and they'd be happy to help you do that. Master detail panels, again, these are table controls, and we will get more into these as we go through application customization. Menu panels, what that is that's this control over here that we're going to see on the left. And we can jump directly into code that affects the menu panels, and we can configure custom properties about these panels as well. Here are specific read-only panels that I liken to kind of print views. This helps us arrange our data in meaningful ways for printing off labels, possibly even business cards or note cards to hand out at a seminar. Here's our record panels, and again we're going to cover this in more detail, but what we're basically boiling down to are views where you can edit the record or you can show the record. And just depending on what your needs are, each one has its purpose. Search and filter controls, these tend to become more and more valuable as your application grows and your data grows, and you need finer tuned abilities to go in and explore that data and return certain views. Table panels we've already discussed, and then my favorite area are the Telerik controls. I am really impressed with the Telerik control suite, and it's a suite I use on a regular basis. In a later video I'm going to show you how to incorporate more controls than just the tab strip and the grid from Telerik, and the tactics that I'm going to demonstrate can be used for component art controls, any third-party control that you can think of that isn't natively supported by IronSpeed. It's a real easy thing to bring them into IronSpeed generated applications. And with that, that's going to cover the second part of this series, getting you familiar with the IronSpeed Designer interface.